Hey everybody, in this video, Jordan Peterson explains the problem with Matt Dillahunty's definition of well-being. This is part of my broader two-part series about how Jordan Peterson challenges Matt Dillahunty's moral code as a whole and the basis that it rests on. I already gave you guys the long introduction in part one. If you haven't seen it, stop watching, go watch that first, and then come back. But if you have seen it, I won't slow you up anymore. Let's get right into it. So before we even get started, this video is titled Jordan Peterson is confused about well-being. It was titled that by our Pangburn Universe's proverbial god, Travis Pangburn. You know, clickbait title, you got to do what you got to do. I am also guilty. It is not the worst thing in the world. Although I will say that I think a better title will be Jordan Peterson challenges this definition of well-being, this concept of well-being. So let's get right into it and see which one is true.
However, we're going to define well-being, which is, I say you can start with a couple of foundations. You can start with death is preferable to life, but you don't get very far that way.
And stop suffering.
Well, no, I'm saying you could start with death is preferable to life, but you don't get very far that way because
you do. You stop suffering.
This is non-trivial. So how Sam Harris defines well-being, I don't remember exactly how he does it, but speaking on a purely utilitarian level, the way that the old utilitarians talked about this was basically you want to maximize pleasure or goodness in your life, basically pleasure, meaning, stuff like that, and you want to minimize suffering. You want to do both of those things. But death takes you to zero, right? So if you got a positive and a negative, well-being, pleasure, good stuff, and then meaningless suffering, negativity, that's the bad stuff. Death takes you to zero because it takes away your capacity for both. And Peterson is saying, well, that's actually an option for some people, because if you're in the red, if you're in well-being debt, let's say, you're in the negative, you're suffering more than you are having pleasure. So overall, you're in the negative. Death would improve your status in terms of your sensations and your feelings. In terms of your wellness. Now, the being part is something Dillahunty's going to talk about in a second. I have seen this particular clip before. Sorry, guys. He's going to talk about the being part in a second. Believe me, we'll get to that. But that's actually a problem. And it's especially a problem if you take the religious tact, as I tend to do, that suffering kind of always outweighs pleasure to some extent. Now, you can give that suffering meaning, which kind of takes its effect on you down. But fundamentally, you're always going to be discontent more than you are content. That's also just a neurochemical thing. You're going to be in a state of want and dissatisfaction more than you are going to be in a state of satisfaction. That's actually good. You would go crazy otherwise. So it also depends on how you define suffering. But on a religious conception, if you're saying that people suffer more, then death would always be preferable. But even if you're, being as charitable as possible, there are situations in which people are suffering more than they're feeling well, and it's most likely that will continue to be the case. So if you agree with this moral system, death actually looks somewhat like an option here. Now, I am not condoning suicide. Suicide is evil, and it's horrific and tragic. And if you're feeling that way, talk to somebody. Hell, leave me a comment. But that said, this moral system seems to be pushing that way. Now, Matt's going to push back against that right now, so let's hear what he has to say and then, give him a fair shake.
You just die.
Yes.
Right, so you can start with...
Okay, I'm sorry, real quick, is that this whole conversation is super comedic. This was true in part one as well. Go watch it. For some reason, this part of the conversation with Peterson and Dillahunty is just very funny. Which is not how the rest of his conversations are usually. There's the occasional joke, but this is really comedic. It's very funny. I just want to point that out.
The presupposition.
Except that when you're dead, you're not being, so there's no well-being.
That's the thing. He is sneaking something in there. So what he said originally was that if you take the standard of well-being, life is preferential to death, right? Okay, but it means that you're taking on something extra. with this definition, which is fine, which is consistent, but you have to be aware of this now. He's not just saying in the utilitarian sense we should make everybody feel more well. He's saying that we should maximize wellness and pleasure, and also we should all continue to stay alive. Both of those things are true. And so it's not just one presupposition anymore. I mean, they shove it into one word. They take the well part and they take the being part and they put it together and say ta-da. But those are technically two different presuppositions, because like we said, there are many situations in which the being is in contradiction to the feeling well. And it seems to me that if you are starting from the presupposition that being should continue to be always, regardless of feelings of wellness, regardless of where you are on like the pleasure and suffering, debt or surplus scale, that feels like a semi-religious assumption. It's certainly a faith-based, a priori assumption that nobody can prove. Because, like I've said before, values are not facts. You cannot prove that it's good for you to stay alive. You can't prove to you that that's good. It's just kind of a priori assumption. And even he would tell you that. I certainly would hope so anyway. Because you can't prove, it's not a fact that it's good for you to stay alive. It is good for you to stay alive, but that's not a scientific fact. But the problem is that feels awfully religious, because I seem to remember a certain religion saying that mankind is made in the image of God, and carries a spark of the divine within them, and are inherently valuable no matter what trials and tribulations they undergo. I'm noticing an extreme similarity between that religious ethic and this faith-based a priori assumption that Matt Dillahunty is making. How strange. It's almost like Peterson might have been onto something back in part 1, go watch it, where he says that Dillahunty acts like he believes in a god. Let's keep on going. I want to give him a fair shake, because I actually like him in this conversation. Dillahunty is a fun guy.
No, well,
let's back up.
Well-being.
No, well, that's not necessarily the
case. If we're looking for the best things about our life, you can't say death is better.
Yeah, you can.
Well, I know that you can say
People do.
Peterson's not like I'm gonna rag on Peterson a little bit here. I don't think Peterson is articulating this very well, because Dillahunty is technically right, but again, he's sneaking in that assumption, right? He's saying if we're looking for the best things about our life, death isn't a part of it. Okay, that's true. But he says best things, and then he said about our life. Again, he's sneaking in that assumption that life is the baseline, that not being alive doesn't matter. Peterson is kind of speaking on this as if he's just talking about wellness versus suffering without the implicit importance of staying alive as part of it. That's how Peterson is talking about this. And I get why, and also, again, I am not the man in the arena. I'm just the critic who has actually seen this clip before. So I have the benefit of hindsight here. But I don't think he's articulating this in the best way.
Do all the time. They did no look.
They can express their preference, but their
this.
preference can be wrong. How can it possibly be better for your life if you're dead?
Right, and even Dillahunty, see, I told you he would admit this. Even he admits that people can have a genuine, well-founded preference for being dead over being alive, just because they feel like their life is full of so much suffering, and then they're that suffering debt there. But again, notice that maybe this is Peterson. Maybe if I brought this to him, Dillahunty would have an answer, because it doesn't look like Peterson's going to bring it up. But I'm noticing that you have that assumption that we're always talking about the best thing for your life, and not the best thing, or the thing that feels best, or the thing that maximizes wellness or minimizes suffering. It's always in the context for your life. Implicit faith-based assumption, very similar to religious conceptions. Almost like he's acting like he believes in God. Almost like Peterson takes a dub on this one. But let me know what you thought. I hope you enjoyed this. See you next time. Hey guys, I hope you enjoyed that reaction video. If you did, drop a like, and please consider subscribing to see more. If you didn't, tell me why. I want to hear your thoughts down in the comments below. I want to have these conversations. If you want to see the rest of my content or explore the broader Pangburn universe that I'm a part of, click one of the buttons that should be floating around my head right about now. And as always, I hope to see you all out there engaging in the war of ideas.